For the benefit of the bots, not for sale. Hello and welcome to Bloke on the Range, and we did do a quick once-over of one of these in a range car park a few years back, but now I have my own. Well, hey, thank you so much for the fine gentleman who sold it to me. You know who you are. So, right, what we have here is one of the very few factory semi-automatic, missing its change lever there, SA80 IW, small arms for the 1980s individual weapon, L85A1. So the original version, British numbers start at A1, just like the old school ones start at Mark 1, unlike American things. There is no L85. L85A1 is the first one. Now, this one here is one of what, according to people who were around at the time, said was 40 that came into the country in the late 80s. When Jonathan Ferguson was writing his book, he was unaware that they existed, which is pretty cool. So this one actually, we can date it to mid to late 1989. It has UN 88, so Nottingham manufacture 1988 receivers, but it has the second type mag catch, so we can date it to that. It doesn't have a modification that came in 1990 to the Nottingham rifles inside. But we are now going to go and do a massive nerdy deep dive into this thing because we have all the time in the world. So you probably want to set the speed to 1.5 or 1.75 if you're watching this. So basically, what do we have? We have a rather heavy bullpup rifle, magazine behind the pistol grip. It's provided with, at the front, a flash suppressor with grenade launching capability. We've got a gas block, which takes a front sight, we'll get onto that. And then we have, going back, we have a push-through safety catch. This has the second pattern trigger. The first pattern trigger was just a curved blade. There were problems with that, which I'll discuss when I look inside. That's improved. There was a later one as a third pattern with a wedge-shaped back to cut through snow and ice. By the way, I'm taking this to finish brutality, so that could be fun. So, sights, the standard for infantry use is the sight unit small arms Trilux, SUSAT. This is a 4-power optic with a very, very, very short eye relief. Your brow is supposed to be on there. Yes, obvious problem is obvious. Here we have a magazine release, which falls neatly under the thumb. This one is not shrouded. The shroud modification actually came in the early 90s. It is not part of the A2 upgrade program, unlike commonly reported. This actually, the initial mag releases were just a standard lever, and who would have thought that a lever poking up like that in a rifle that is designed to be slung across the body would result in problems. This one here, if you look, it's actually thicker on the not pressy end and lower on the pressy end, thinking, okay, when that knocks against kid, it's going to be knocked inwards, not outwards. Yeah, it didn't work. And in fact, when they first started doing the shroud update, they said these ones didn't need it, but in the end, they did, and they were all replaced. Now listen up, Garand thumb, bolt release catch. On a full auto one, there's a fire selector here. We've got the 2 pins, and we've got sling loops. And the sling is, I'm going to put this on the easiest way. This is not the way that is in the manual. The manual way is actually more complicated for some reason. So we go 1, 2, 3. In the manual way, you're supposed to unattach it, to put it through this first, and then work out where the hell it's supposed to go through there. This way is actually far simpler. Goes through like this. And in fact, the sling loops have artifacts of some of the prototypes because they can work on both sides, because it was original plan to have 10% left-handed for the left-handers, and in the end that didn't happen, but there's a couple of little artifacts of that. So we end up with, it's commonly called a 3-point sling. So like that, you can actually backpack the rifle using these 2 straps. You can strap it across your body. You can set it at whatever length and use it like normal. Or you can have it strapped across your body fairly tight, and then whip that off, and then we end up with a single point sling hangs off you. It's very flexible, and actually that works quite well. There's of all the things to complain about on this rifle, the sling is not one of them. And finally, the Brits got side slinging right, which is good. So let us quickly whip this back off. So if we look here, this sling loop is angled. This works actually very, very well for carrying. And in fact, you can switch it around to the other side, but as I said, the left-handed ones never happened. And at the back, you can push the sling loop through either way. The initial ones at the back, they were just held on the plastic that died, and then they put metal plates and stuff in there. What else have we got on the left-hand side here? We have this hatch, pop. Later ones have rather more spring tension on there that gets us at the gas system, but we'll deal with that when we take it apart. Magazines are standard compatible. In fact, the initial issue was with this type of grey but wears to mustard Colt magazine. These do work a little better. These are very, very tippy followers, way worse than these originals, than these Colts. You can just feel the weight difference. They are huge robustness difference, and contrary to popular belief, these magazines are actually fine until they're not. It's often reported they were intended to be disposable. I've seen no evidence of this whatsoever. They're certainly semi-disposable quality. The problem is that because they're quite thin aluminium, the lips would get damaged, and then I'm trying to explain to the quartermaster that your mag doesn't work. They just hang around in service. I mean, basically with magazines, when they're suspect, dent them, chuck them, get rid of them. Treat them as a semi-disposable item. And I'm going to try and run Finish Brutality on these, but I'll take some USGIs as a backup. This one might be a bit wonky there. I'm not going to get a chance to run them all, so it might be fun on the clock. So coming back down this side, we have the bolt hold open catch. We've got a dust cover, which closes up the back end of the receiver. We have the round cocking handle on these. We have the other end of the safety catch there. Other side of our little hatch. And I think obviously this on gear, you often see the early ones with black nasty tape holding it down because it's slung across the body and it comes open like that. And I wonder if they weren't more worried when they were designing it of people's fingers pushing up on it on this side rather than actually thinking about carrying it around slung across your body. So, with combi tool in hand, let us get it apart. First of all, we'll take the SUSAT off. Okay, this would not be taken off for every stripping because doing it too often can trash the zero. So we have a 22mm rail that is not quite Weaver, and then we've got 3 positions which a locating stud there can go in to give 3 different eye reliefs depending on the size of the user. This sight is fully external adjustment. We've got left and right here. People often forget to tighten up the other screw. They only loosen one side and then the whole top goes do 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 do. Elevation, we have a drum here for range, and then we have adjustment there, and we adjust the sights with this screwdrivery thing for that, and that screwdrivery thing for that, and for that screwdrivery thing for loosening the lock nuts. And there's anti-shake washers in there. Early ones didn't have them, and then they got loose under vibration, so we don't like that. On top, we have the emergency battle sights. They are not the iron sights. These are the iron sights. These are basically useless and not used. They're more or less aligned with the tube. No one ever used them. They're pointless. But I guess in a stretch, if the optic actually got broken, you could vaguely use them to make sure you're pointing vaguely in the right direction. The iron sights, on the other hand, we have here adjustment. We use this down and up. It's should be fairly obvious, and then this, you can undo that all the way and mount it on that there, and this should never be mounted if the scope is mounted. The rear sight, we have a locating stud which has to be screwed in and out with your combi tool. We've got two apertures. We've got a big one for low light and a other one for normal. I believe they're both for 200 meters. This is the non-infantry sight, although over time, as the army's got smaller, more and more people have got SUSATs. The SUSAT is heavy. This is like 700 grams, like a pound and a half right there, on top of the rifle, up quite high. It is quite substantial. So next up, we're going to make sure the hammer is back. We are going to pop that pin, not all the way. These pins, later the detents are better. These ones tend to just pull all the way out. And there we go, we got it right. Now, when you open this, if you pull it out one too far, the entire spring assembly is going to jump out at you. So now we're separated into what in American parlance is the upper and the lower receivers. In British parlance, it's the body and the trigger mechanism housing, or TMH. So from here, we carefully pull the pin, ooh, and it comes out. Let's lose that. It's stuck, haha. There we go, woo! Now the guide rod and spring assembly just shot itself across my living room there. It's kind of AR-18-esque, with the exception that instead of having a spring on each of the guide rods, it's got a separate spring guide, and what this actually allows is that you can have more bearing surface between the carrier and the rails, because you don't need to use the carrier partially as a spring guide, because they're counterboard on AR-18s to give the spring somewhere to go. So, next up, we have the cocking handle, and we have the very, very, very AR-18-esque. And the big design fail that they did with this is, compared to the AR-18, they increased the dwell time massively. And I'll do another vid where I look part by part, because it's actually quite a close AR-18 derivative. But there's a lot of travel before the cam unlocks the bolt head. This was a source of many of the problems, because an AR-18 unlocks while there's still a good whack of residual chamber pressure, which helps things along. And here it's dropped a lot more before it unlocks, and you're at the mercy of just the momentum of the bolt carrier group. So from here, let us get the operating rod and its attendant spring. We have the gas cylinder, and yes, it's not cleaned, haha. So this is an AR-18-esque fixed standing piston, movable cylinder. And then we take our combi tool and we put it like that, and we push that in, and then we take out the gas plug. So as usual on an AR-18 system, it does that, boop, boop, boop. And we actually have two different gas vent sizes, and we have three different gas settings defined by three different détente positions. There's a normal, an excess, and an off for grenade launching with grenade launching blanks. So there we have the forend, and there we see a moderately chunky barrel, particularly under the handguard. That's where a lot of the weight's coming from, and certainly coming up to the receiver, to the trunnion or barrel extension, which is part of the receiver on this. It's fairly chunky under there. Now here we have alignment marks, and what is typical for a lot of these is that this one is ever so slightly overclocked. There's two marks there. So these are actually, the barrels are timed with a selection of these breeching up washers. So what you do is you nip it hand tight up to that, and if it overturns or underturns hand tight, you change the thickness of barrel washer. Then when you've got the one that nips up there hand tight, you then stick the torque wrench on it and crank it around till the other one aligns, and it's quite common for them to be a little bit over, and that's again seems to be some source of some of the problems, because this is a timed component, so if it's overclocked, you've got the gas system working at a slight angle, adding friction into the system. So in terms of inside the body, there's nothing very exciting going on there at all. It's just a pressed steel section with the cam track, just like in pretty much any AR-18 derived system. And then, see if I can get enough light in there. You can see that's absolutely classic. That's from the AR-10 onwards, really. That kind of arrangement. They weren't inventing anything new there in the slightest. Now, one of the things they did in the A2 upgrade was fiddle around with the splines and the barrel extension amongst other things, but that's a topic for a different day. You can see here that we've got the point for the pin, and then we've got a sort of C-type hook there, and that's what the TMH hooks into that and goes over like that. So let's go over now to the TMH. And let's start at the front. So the safety catch seems to have been positioned for the designer's convenience, and it's easy for the shooter to get off to fire a shot, but it requires either moving your whole hand around like that, which is really awkward, or according to the manual, and this is by far the easy way to do it, is you bring your left hand back and use the thumb of your left hand. So off is easy, on is a bit of a pain. Some of the trial series rifles had a thumb switch FAL style, which would have been much better, but I mean, frankly, even if it had been here, it would be easier because you could just do it on and off like that, kind of style AUG or Bushmaster M17S style, but no, it had to be that way. So it's a bullpup. Safety catch is literally just a bar with a notch in it that either allows or doesn't allow the top of the trigger to pass. We have a long extension bar all the way to the back here, and the reason for this chunky trigger is that they discovered that if it was unsafed and dropped on the muzzle with the original trigger, there was enough mass in the transfer bar to drop the sear, to pull the sear and fire the gun. So what they did was they put this chunky trigger on there as a counterbalance, because that's going to work in that direction, that's going to work in that direction, so it balances out to a certain degree. So back here we have the bolt hold open, which is on an axis here, which carries this lever, which has the bolt release on it, and you've got this little finger there that is actuated by the magazine floor plate. So that's the automatic hold open. So by pressing, when it's actuated, by pressing down on that, we can drop the bolt. And that's the hook there that holds back the bolt carrier group. Now, you can, of course, use these the opposite way around to intended, but the way it's used is that you use this with your thumb as you cock it with a reach around, and then you use this with the fingertips, or if you are monkey gripping, you can reach it like that. Nothing spectacular going on there. The trigger mechanism is very, very different from an AR-15 or an AR-18. There's a safety sear here that's actuated by the bolt carrier, and normally there's a change lever here, up for repetition, single shot, down for automatic fire. What you've got going on in here, so you see that? So when it's ready to fire, you've got that transfer bar and that trips the sear. That comes back, and then you've got that sear there, which I believe is called the interrupter sear in the system, and that works like a normal disconnector. Let's just do that again. Okay, but what we've also got is this safety sear. So if we start from the hammer down with the trigger pressed, let's simulate the bolt carrier group pressing the hammer all the way back. There were 2 clicks there. So the hammer is currently being held by that there, which is called the interrupter sear and serves the same function as a disconnector in an AR-15. If I release that, nothing happens. That's because there's an extra notch, an extra sear notch on the hammer that's held by this little puppy here, which is the safety sear. When the bolt carrier is out of battery, that holds the hammer back. And it's only once the bolt carrier group goes fully forward that releases, and now the hammer is being held by the interrupter sear, and as I release the trigger, the interrupter sear moves out of the way and it's back on the main sear and will drop again. Now, when in automatic fire, it's simply the interrupter sear is simply prevented from doing its job. So it's just the main sear and the safety sear that act. Your friends in the ATF would have absolute kittens over this trigger mechanism as a result. Now, in semi-auto fire, that isn't necessary to function, but what it actually does is it means that you don't get a click. If it's not quite in battery, you get a dead trigger. So that's another topic for another time, perhaps. And right up the back here, we've got a buffer that the bolt carrier group smacks into at the rear of its travel. Now, if we move on to the bolt carrier group, anyone who's ever had an AR-15 will recognise this. Basically, it's the same in all the AR-15, AR-18 derived systems. The firing pin even looks the same. Cam stud, voila. Very AR-18-esque. Extractor ejector, absolutely classic, 7 lug bolt, pretty much one-to-one copied. So let's just put that back together. So this only goes in the right way round. They've been clever with the holes, and it's the firing pin that holds the cam stud in, and then this pin holds the firing pin in. And as in all these systems, the firing pin can only protrude when the carrier is sufficiently forward. Although here you've got more leeway with that than you do in an AR-15. So to put it back together, let us start with the gas parts. So it's alleged that detent stud can actually end up in the hole in the barrel. I don't want to risk it, but so we very carefully put it on the side, push it in, push it through, and then we'll turn it around to the normal position in there. Push. Voila. Gas cylinder. It's a bit fiddly, this bit. You've got to find the hole down the bottom there. Where are we? There we go. We've found the hole. Push it in, and then that will move like that. Next up, we make sure that the bolt is forward in the carrier. We push it forward. We take the cocking handle, and it was found out during the upgrade, or before the upgrade, that these cocking handles were a problem, that cases were bouncing off them, and that's part of the reason for the shark's fin on the A2 and later A3. And then we put this in. Which way around? That way around. And then, so now we need to get that pin back in, but only to the first notch, which is difficult in these early ones because there isn't really a notch. Okay, if you push it in too far, it fouls the passageway for the lug on the back of the TMH. So together like that, pin in, and then we can function check it. And I'll just show you the thing. So that's out of battery, it won't go. So little side note here, okay, in this situation, in an AR-15, M16, whatever, because the auto-sear works differently, you don't have this out of battery safety thing, that will get you a click that wouldn't fire around because the firing pin won't come far enough out of the bolt face. If you were to forward assist on an AR-15 in such a situation, you will, like, your best outcome is neutral, and your worst outcome is you've made a stoppage even worse. Here, forward assist gives you a live trigger, because it's literally that reset. If I just bring it back so that it doesn't, dead trigger because it's being held on the safety sear, click, very, very audible click, and then it will go. Now that I've got it apart, you can see that you could put this on the wrong side, but we don't. So it goes on there, and then the screw goes back in. So now we've got the rifle back together. I'm taking this to Finish Brutality in a couple of weeks from filming. So what I'm going to do, because of the snowy and icy conditions, I'm going to put the iron sights on it. I'm going to shoot the SUSAT. But what I want to do is I want to zero the set of iron sights so that if there's problems in the snow and ice due to fogging or anything on the SUSAT, that I can whoop some zeroed well enough iron sights on it and then not have to worry about it. So I will have them in my gear, and if there's a problem with the SUSAT, it will come off, and the iron sights with their attendant short sight radius will go on. And I got something wrong earlier. The vertical adjustment on the iron sights faces towards the shooter. I should have known. I used to use these iron sights all the time on cadet GPs. So all I need to do now is tighten this up in probably the middle hole, which is about it's a bit awkward. It will take forever. I'm not going to do it on camera. And then I can zero the irons, take them off, zero the SUSAT, and leave it. And that's the plan. So that is basically it. They do run better, particularly under clean conditions, than Americans tend to believe. There are some good features on them, like the length of the forend is quite good for a bullpup, so you're not all scrunched up. The weight, the center of mass with the SUSAT on it is like there. It's really high, and it's really quite a long way back, which people who grow up with it think it's great, but people who grow up with proper rifles think it's not. The forend is quite well configured. That is a bad design. You reach, the drills are all left-handed, which is fine, and people don't seem to worry about that when it's an AK. That was a problem, but was fixed. That they never changed anything on. The sling setup's quite good. That's a problem. You can shoot it left-handed up to a point, but you need to keep your chin back here. This will be a subject of another video, but at close range you can. It was generally believed it wasn't, but then people just weren't. There wasn't enough input from people who actually knew how to shoot. In fact, even with the iron sights on, it's still fairly chonky because there's an awful lot of metal in the receiver here, and it's got a fairly chonky barrel. I mean, receivers on an AR-18 are only about that long. Here, you've just got so much more sheet steel. This is something like 3.7 kilos with the irons, and it's like 4.5 kilos loaded. It's stronger than 90 weight with a SUSAT, but then you do get an optic on it. Yeah, there are ergonomics issues with it, but they're not as bad as people make out. The drills actually generally make sense. This is easy to find, even if the sling's over it. If the sling's over this, it's fine. It just falls to your thumb. That's logical. That's logical. The holding open device, you can do it with either hand, even if you're supposed to do it with the left hand. Doesn't really matter. That springing open was a pain. They made it stiffer. And yeah, otherwise I think this will be an excellent special power garbage tier adventure in Finland. So if you watched this far, thank you so much. Thank you to all our supporters, whether it's via the app, Patreon or Player, or just liking and subscribing. Thank you all so much. It enables us to acquire rare and exciting things like this and do rare and exciting content with them. So thank you all very much, and see you again sometime. Bye.